Political battle between President Trump and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi as the partial government shutdown rages on. This is Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. The president has blocked Pelosi's use of a military aircraft for a trip to Afghanistan. It happened at the very last moment yesterday, citing the shutdown. This after the House Speaker called for the president to delay his State of the Union address over what she called security concerns. A spokesperson for Pelosi hit back today, saying this, quote, "The delegation was prepared to fly commercially to proceed with this vital trip. This morning we learned that the administration had leaked the commercial travel plans as well. In light of the grave threats caused by the president's action, the delegation has decided to postpone the trip," end quote. Peter Doocy is live on Capitol Hill, and we do more reporting on this to figure out where the facts are. Peter?
Harris, the Speaker of the House is not talking to President Trump today about border wall money in a potential spending bill, but she is making this sensational accusation that after postponing the Democratic delegation's trip yesterday, the administration leaked a commercial itinerary.
We had the prerogative to travel commercially, and we made plans to do that until the administration then leaked that we were traveling commercially, and that endangers. We weren't going to go because we had a report from Afghanistan that the president outing our trip had made the scene on the ground much more dangerous.
But a senior White House official calls that charge asinine and shared with me this morning the State Department email that Pelosi is referencing there, including the part that says operational security was severely compromised because the Afghan media started reporting that Pelosi's delegation could be arriving by a commercial flight, which would be easy to predict. The State Department did not accuse the administration of leaking anything after that initial announcement. Regardless of what happened, though, Pelosi is here, which Republicans are pleased about.
So I think it's appropriate for him to keep everybody here and others. You know, we're all on call and will be, but if she's in Afghanistan, she's not going to be on call. And we need to, and they're the ones, it's the Democrats that are keeping keeping everything closed. And so that's a perfectly good reason for him to want her here.
Some federal employees can't afford food anymore after a paycheck-free month. So today, Virginia Senator Mark Warner popped up at a food bank to feed the furloughed.
Why would you hold folks in the State Department? Why would you hold folks who work at the Smithsonian as contract workers? Why would you hold folks who work with people getting food stamps hostage when the dispute is about border security? I think the actions of this White House are disgraceful.
Another problem looming in February, Super Bowl security. Democrats are apparently worried now that the game in Atlanta might need to be postponed, and a Republican from Georgia told me this morning that one issue could be Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport.
The airport is a challenge. I've been through Atlanta twice this week, and I can tell you there are long lines, and that's something that we need to work on. But again, I have complete confidence in TSA and their professionalism. They get it. They understand what we're doing right now, what we're going through, and I believe that they're going to deliver.
800,000 federal workers are now 1 day closer to missing another check, but very few of the 535 members of Congress are here working on a way out. Harris.
All right, Peter Doocy, thank you very much. I want to bring in now Republican Senator John Kennedy of the Appropriations Committee. Senator, thank you for being with me. I want to start with where we are in terms of people suffering now as they begin to miss yet another paycheck and what impact that has on the conversations going on Capitol Hill.
Well, 25% of the government is shut down. Nobody wants it to be shut down. I hitched a ride this week from New Orleans back to Washington with the president on his airplane. We talked for about an hour. He doesn't want to shut government down. He doesn't dislike Speaker Pelosi, but he believes very strongly, and I think he's right, that you can't seal, you can't secure a 1,900-mile border without it, in part, using a barrier. I mean, duh. That's been the experience so far. We've got 600 miles of border walls, and it's the experience in 77 other countries. Now, look, he's willing to negotiate. He told me that straight up. Some of my colleagues in Congress are running around. I don't mean any disrespect. I'm glad they're talking, but some of them are running around like sprayed roaches, coming up with deals to bring to him, none of which include a border wall. And if they bring him a proposal that doesn't have a border wall, it's dead as 4 o'clock. He is resolute, I don't see that he's going to change his mind.
So the president is resolute, and you always put things in such memorable and colorful ways. We won't ever forget that, what you just said. But our Republicans also, it would seem so. Let's pop up what the president said in a tweet. Never seen the Republican Party so unified. No cave on the issue of border and national security. A beautiful thing to see, especially when you hear the new rhetoric spewing from the mouths of the Democrats who talk open border, high taxes and crime, stop criminals and drugs now, exclamation point. So is he right to say that you are so unified with no willingness to go ahead without what his vision is on the wall?
Well, I think, at least on the Senate side, everybody's unified in this respect. We're unified with the president that we don't want the government shut down. We're unified with the fact that no bill is going to come to the Senate floor unless Mitch McConnell brings it to the Senate floor. That's the right of a majority leader. And the majority leader has already said that unless President Trump will sign the bill, he's not going to bring it to the floor.
All right, let me ask it this way.
What else?
Let me ask it this way real quickly. What would it take for the American people right now to get the attention of both Democrats and Republicans to get you guys to come to the middle on this? And I say that because, yes, 25% of the government is shut down. That's partial, but that's almost, it's more than 800,000 people. And you saw the pictures of people who need help now, even just putting food on the table because their paychecks may not have been as big previous to the shutdown such that they had months of savings. So what does it take from the people to get you guys to come to the center?
Well, we are. I think on our side, we are in the center. President Trump is, he told me, eyeball to eyeball. He said, I'm ready to negotiate. But he's right that you can't secure a 1,900-mile border without using, in part, barriers. And Ms. Pelosi says, well, open up government and we'll talk, but under no circumstances am I going to agree to any border wall funding. And I guess she thinks we ought to tear down the 600 miles of border wall we have now. And I just don't think that's realistic. And I'm sorry that Speaker Pelosi couldn't make her trip. I don't want to tell her what to do with her time. She's a smart, talented lady. She's Speaker of the House. But doggone it, we went through this before when the president stayed in Washington over Christmas and she went to Hawaii, and now she wants to go to Afghanistan, and our troops are important, but she needs to be in Washington to negotiate. The president canceled his trip to Davos. I was going to the Davos World Economic Forum. I canceled mine. A bunch of us did. We need to get this worked out. But until Ms. Pelosi recognizes that you can't secure a 1,900-mile border without using a barrier, I just think that's not middle ground. That's left field.
Senator Kennedy, thank you so much. House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer and some others have said as well on the Democrat side. I don't know if they're all talking to each other and listening. Good to see you, and thank you for your time today, sir.
Thanks, Harris.
The Pentagon is now identifying Michael Cohen to lie to Congress about negotiations to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. Democrats now demanding an investigation, with some calling for impeachment, while Trump's legal team is slamming the report and taking aim at Cohen himself. Live now to Chief White House correspondent John Roberts with the latest. John?
And getting more reaction from the president's outside legal team in just the last hour, Harris, in a statement that showed up in my inbox just a little while ago. Rudy Giuliani saying, quote, any suggestion from any source that the president counseled Michael Cohen to lie is categorically false. Michael Cohen is a convicted criminal and a liar. To quote the prosecutors, he has traded on a pattern of lies and dishonesty over an extended period of time, and for that, he is going to pay a very, very serious price. Today's claims are just more made-up lies born of Michael Cohen's malice and desperation in an effort to reduce his sentence. Rudy Giuliani's first statement earlier this morning was rather glib, saying, if you believe Michael Cohen, I've got a great deal on the Brooklyn Bridge for you, but being a little more serious about it now. Quoting two law enforcement officials, BuzzFeed News says Michael Cohen was told by the president to lie to Congress about plans to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, specifically the timeline for that and the president's involvement in it. The report also says that the president supported a plan during the campaign for him to travel to Russia to meet with Vladimir Putin and try to jumpstart the Trump Tower project. BuzzFeed quotes the president as saying to Cohen, quote, make it happen. We also got reaction from the White House this morning. Here's spokesman Hogan Gidley on it. Listen here.
This is absolutely ludicrous that we are giving any type of credence or credibility to a news outlet like BuzzFeed. They are responsible completely and totally for the release of a discredited, disproven, false dossier. And now the author of the piece in question that you're talking about went on air this morning and said he couldn't corroborate any of his own evidence. He ran it anyway.
But asked a couple of times by Bill Hemmer in that interview this morning whether or not they would issue a full denial of the allegations in BuzzFeed. Gidley kind of deflected. It has been the White House practice to not comment on this at all. So he kind of went a little further than they normally go anyways. Now, only BuzzFeed has this story. No one else, and we've been trying to, has been able to corroborate it. But here's something to keep in mind. The Office of Special Counsel interviewed Michael Cohen several times, spoke with him for lengthy periods of time, hours-long interviews with him, and sought fit to send a note to the judge who was involved in his sentencing hearing back in December to say, look, we think that he's been a valuable witness and we would recommend leniency in his sentencing. The judge, though, went with the recommendations of the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York on that. Harris?
All right. John Roberts, thank you very much. I want to bring in James Trusty, former DOJ prosecutor and partner at IFRA Law. Okay, people can't see off camera, but I want to share with everybody that you were kind of shaking your head as John Roberts was reporting that last bit on Michael Cohen. Why?
Well, it's a mixed bag. When you talk about Cohen at the sentencing in New York, the Southern District of New York completely trashed him and described him as a failed cooperator. So there was a little bit of lip service from general counsel on a much smaller potato case saying he did cooperate, he did meet with this. But at the end of the day, these two prosecutorial authorities aren't completely distinct. They're looking at him as a whole and saying he didn't quite carry through to be a full-fledged cooperator.
If you're dealing with Michael Cohen going forward, I know the word cooperate, I've talked with others about that, but what do you need to believe him right now? A felon, a convicted criminal liar. What do you need?
Right. Well, look, I did federal prosecution for a long time. We worked with very slippery cooperators for a long time. And there's times where they just fail and you walk away. There's other times where they're incredibly slippery and pretty dangerous to ever get in bed with. But if you listen to them and you can corroborate it with serious independent evidence, I don't mean just the day was sunny, just like he said, but a videotape, an audio tape, an email, something that's really powerful, then it's a different story. So, you know, the old saying, a stopped clock is right twice a day. Cohen could be right about some things. It doesn't mean that he's right consistently or uniformly, but you know, you've got to really wade into the very deep details to figure that out.
In your experience with, and I wrote it down, slippery cooperators. I like that because that kind of, it's benign, but it gets to the point. In your experience dealing with somebody who's facing prison time of 3 years on March 6th, and we're now inching our way toward that, and he knows that he could perhaps mitigate his circumstances in terms of that sentence by what he says now. How do you handle him? What are you looking for? And can he better his case at this point?
Well, I think that's the rub. He really is not in any sort of position to change the sentence. It's done. The ship has sailed.
So you don't think he can do that?
I really don't. There is a procedural mechanism called Rule 35 where a prosecutor can go back later and say, hey, by the way, he cooperated. But that sentencing memorandum from Southern District of New York was kind of devastating. It talked about him being coming up short on his own misconduct. And I don't think that's really going to change by going on a public relations tour.
His attorney today is saying about the BuzzFeed story, out of respect for Mr. Mueller's and the Office of Special Counsel's investigation, Mr. Cohen declined to respond to the questions asked by the reporters. So do I. And then he talks about that February 7th date where he'll go before the Oversight Committee. Not exactly the same thing as sitting down with federal prosecutors.
No, I mean, look, when you go in front of Congress and you're giving testimony, the cross-examination, tends to be either when did you stop beating your wife or how long have you loved puppies? I mean, it's all for show. There's not a whole lot of substantive stuff that comes out of it. So I don't expect that going in front of Congress will really unveil absolute truths from Mr. Cohen.
Real quickly, also on the point of fact, from what John Roberts was reporting, BuzzFeed has had some challenges. Credibility-wise, in the past, they faced a defamation lawsuit with regard to President Trump, then candidate, and they actually won on that, having to do with the anti-Trump dossier. But they're already now quoting somebody, and we don't know what their reporting does in terms of cooperation, like you would do at the DOJ. So are we to believe or trust what BuzzFeed has or not? What do you think?
Well, sitting here at a media outlet, I hate to say this, but look, you have to take all of it with a grain of salt. You have to really look hard about the overall picture and have some patience to wait for the full truth to come out. What concerns me in part about the BuzzFeed article isn't just the source, that it's BuzzFeed, which is kind of almost Wikipedia-like, but that it says there's law enforcement sources that are giving this information. And that's really, if true, that's a first, and that's a very upsetting thing, because the whole history of these investigations has been kind of marred by press advocacy by the FBI. So I hope that's not true, but we have to wait and see.
James Trusty, great to have you on the mezzanine today. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Well, an 18-year-old is now facing terrorism-related charges after a violent confrontation with law enforcement more than a week ago. A sheriff's deputy shot and injured a teenager after police say he started throwing rocks and pulled a knife outside a police substation near Phoenix. He had called to request an officer come outside.
Calls were somewhat cryptic regarding his need, but he was very, very adamant about the fact that he wanted to meet with the deputy in person. And he made some statements during that call to indicate that he had an affiliation with a terror ID.
People expected at this event on this anniversary of the Supreme Court's 1973 Roe versus Wade decision, which legalized abortion. Plus, President Trump, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo meeting with a top North Korean official amid speculation about a second summit between the president and Kim Jong-un. A live report. Stay tuned. The 46th annual March for Life now underway in Washington, D.C. An estimated 100,000 people gathering at the National Mall today to peacefully protest abortion. Now they make their way down Constitution Avenue toward the Supreme Court and Capitol building. The high-profile event marks the anniversary of the Supreme Court's 1973 Roe versus Wade decision, which legalized abortion in the United States. And this Fox News alert. President Trump is meeting with a top North Korean official today in the Oval Office. This after Secretary of State Mike Pompeo sat down with the North Korean ex-spy chief at a hotel in Washington. Amid speculation, a potential second summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un could be in the works. Greg Palcott reports on this from London. Greg?
Yes, hi, Harris. Yeah, high-stakes meetings going on right now in Washington. We are, in fact, waiting on word of the outcome of that meeting in the White House between President Trump and the top North Korean nuclear negotiator. His name is Kim Yong-chol. Now, this followed a session, as you noted earlier today, between that North Korean official and Secretary of State Pompeo and the U.S. Special Envoy to North Korea, Stephen Biegun. According to the State Department, the readout from that was that it was a good discussion and that it dealt with efforts to make progress on the commitments that President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un made at their summit in Singapore last year. The White House says this current meeting that could be still going on right now is looking at relations between the official came to D.C., Kim Yong-chol. He had a meeting with President Trump, and he brought with him a letter, a very large letter from Kim Jong-un. 10 days later, they met in Singapore. Now, the word is, Harris, is that this North Korean official again is bringing yet another letter, no word on how big the size is, to President Trump, and that too, in fact, could be dealing with another meeting. A reminder for your viewers, relations have not been great between North Korea and the United States since that summit last June. Chairman Kim says he still wants denuclearization, but is making more demands of the U.S. And just in this past week, from Vice President Pence and others, we've been hearing the Trump administration saying they want to see more from North Korea. Again, one more time for our viewers, your viewers, Harris, we are waiting word on this White House meeting, and we got one more wrinkle. Fox News can confirm, speaking with the Swedish Foreign Ministry, there's yet another meeting planned in Stockholm, perhaps in the next 24 hours. They tell us that another high-ranking North Korean official is there, and the reports have been that Begin, that is the U.S. Special Envoy to North Korea, Stephen Begin, will be a part of those discussions. So at least the presumption may be that there will be progress, and the sense is that in the next couple hours we'll find out where this whole thing is going. Back to you, Harris.
All right, Greg Palcott, thank you very much. Appreciate your time and your reporting. Christian Whiten, former State Department senior advisor for President Trump and President George W. Bush, joins me now. Also the author of the book, Smart Power Between Diplomacy and War. And that's exactly what we need right now. So let's talk North Korea. And I'll start with, why all of the written communication from the North Koreans, letters being carried, and again, potentially another letter, we don't know the length of it. Why communicate that way? You've got the phone, you're meeting in person.
Right. Well, North Korea does things somewhat oddly and somewhat the old-fashioned way. If you look at their propaganda, it's sort of right out of 1930s Stalinist stuff. And the way they negotiate, they don't have diplomatic relations with a lot of countries. The ones with which they do, they tend to have extremely limited interaction. This is a way of Kim, I think, signaling and reminding people that his interlocutor, his counterpart, is not our Secretary of State. It's the President of the United States. Kim is the head of state. Trump is the head of state. And that's sort of, I think, a marker they want to reinforce. And I think it also leads toward, another summit where all the signs are pointing toward Kim wanting to meet again with Trump.
And what do you want those letters or this communication to contain? Because, I mean, I've been reading that even the vice president has said there's not been enough progress or any on a disarmament framework. So we're kind of still at the beginning, aren't we?
A little bit. Importantly, coming out of the Singapore summit, you had a meeting of the minds between Kim and President Trump, and that is a meeting of the minds in agreement to disarm. What they didn't agree to, apparently, and what has not been sort of agreed to subsequently, is the sequencing, how that happens, what North Korea gives up, what it has to give up first, and then what it gets in return, which would be sanctions relief from us and probably economic assistance from South Korea. We don't want to go first because in the past, in the Clinton administration and the George W. Bush administration, we gave concessions first and then they did nothing in return. Kim, understandably, somewhat doesn't want to give up his nukes first because he thinks we may not follow through.
Well, and now maybe it's time to talk about what they do want, where their economy is, and other details like that, because the president's critics say it's too soon for a second summit.
I don't see any downside to the summit, though. There's some people who thought it sort of lowers the president of the United States in his office to meet with a tyrant. On the other hand, it's sort of common sense that you need to meet with people you want things from. And also, North Korea, you really can't delegate down. That's the problem that Steve Biegun, the North Korean negotiator, and Secretary of State Pompeo has had. When they meet with people below that senior level, these are people who are unable or unwilling to agree to things. And, if they make a mistake, they may face execution in their system, not a lot of room for error. So it's important to have meetings at that senior level.
Real quickly, so you've got this meeting today and then going forward, potentially a second summit. Are you seeing anything other than maybe not launching ballistic missiles in the change in behavior at this point of North Korea?
Yeah, there still has been a very big change from where they were. You're right. They're not testing nukes. They're not launching ballistic missiles. They did mothball their testing facility. They shut down a missile engine production facility. And so there is, the situation we're in isn't necessarily satisfactory, but it's much better than where we were in previous administrations.
Do you think the president gets enough credit for that?
No, I don't. I think a lot of people are skeptical, and I'm a little skeptical that North Korea truly wants to come in from the cold, but it's definitely worth trying and, probably worth going to a summit, probably in Hanoi.
All right. Christian Whiten, thank you very much. Good to see you. Details about how he managed to escape capture. Brian Yennis is live in New York City in our newsroom. And every time I see you in the hallway, you catch me up on the juicy details in this.
Yeah, Harris, this is a real-life telenovela playing out in federal court. Riveting testimony yesterday from a woman named Lucero Sanchez, the former politician, when Sanchez began to sob. Now, as private text messages between El Chapo and his mistress were shared in court, and one exchange, Sanchez told El Chapo she stamped dozens of kilos of marijuana with a heart and a number 4. El Chapo's birthday is April 4th, and Sanchez texted this: "The heart means that I love you, and the number 4 means that I bless the day that you came into this world." El Chapo responds, "Oh yes, that's right. Buy 300 next week, and that way you can make another trip, love." Harris, one of El Chapo's mistresses, seemingly in love. El Chapo seemingly more interested in the marijuana.
Yeah.
So an incredible story.
Don't have to read between the text messages there. Brian Yanis, thank you for the very latest on this. A highly anticipated sentencing hearing is underway for former Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke. Van Dyke is convicted of killing 17-year-old Laquan McDonald in October of 2014. That incident captured on the now open gates as Mexican authorities back down from confronting that caravan. President Trump tweeted this: "Another big caravan headed our way. Very hard to stop without a wall!" Exclamation point. Live now to Steve Harrigan in Mexico. Steve?
Harris, we're watching the lead element of this caravan here about 10 miles across the border into Mexico, and they are making their way here in small groups, some wearing sneakers, some wearing Crocs, some in flip-flops. It's a tough route in the daytime, very hot here. They have their sweatshirts from the cold and ice, most of these people sleeping outside. Inexplicable why that border gate was thrown open about 4 in the morning. About 1,000 people crossed over. Since then, it's been much more organized on the border with Mexico. Mexican authorities issuing bracelets to the migrants, getting their documents, and giving them a 5-day waiting period before they can cross over into Mexico. They're also giving them 1-year visas to work in Mexico. Most of the people, though, we talk to say they have 2 goals: 1, to get to the United States, and 2, to work. This is really for most not about asylum. It's about finding jobs. It's about economics. Here's what one woman had to say.
We just asked for an opportunity. We just want to work to help our family. Even 3 years, that's my goal. To do something for my children, to buy a house for my children.
The convoy now is about 2,000 strong. It could grow as it continues to move through Mexico. The government of Mexico, with the new leftist president, has said they will be treated humanely. Lopez Obrador saying, "We're opening our arms to the Central American migrants. We will treat them humanely." This is a sharp contrast to what we saw a few months ago. But the bigger question really is on the Mexican people. How will they treat the migrants? Will there be some fatigue as resources in some cities like Tijuana are strained? We've seen and heard some resentment as this second caravan begins to make its way, with at least 2 more forming. So this is something that's going to keep on coming through Mexico towards the U.S. Harris, back to you.
Well, and one big question we won't be able to answer until we see time go on, but as those resources are leaned upon in Mexico, what does that do to Mexico's resolve to keep those people south of the border and to keep their commitment to that through either asylum applications or whatever is going on? It puts a lot of pressure on a system.
It is. I think you're really pointing to the gap between the professed humanity and liberalism of the president and some even local businesses in Tijuana who are resentful now of some of the migrants. They've actually just closed one of the major shelters that at one point held several thousand migrants. This, as a new caravan, is really on the verge of winding up in Tijuana. They're shutting down shelters there. So a gap between what the president says and what some of the people on the street are feeling, Harris.
Steve Harrigan, thank you very much. A winter storm set to barrel through large parts of the country this weekend, with some areas getting more than a foot of snow, maybe even a few feet. Snowfall already hitting parts of the Midwest. A live update on that. Plus, a new poll is giving some warning signs for President Trump as the 2020 election approaches. Power Panel will slide in to talk about all of it.
I want to keep doing what I love. That's
2020 presidential campaign heating up already. A new NPR PBS Marist poll shows 57% of registered voters will not vote for President Trump in the next election. Why? One analyst says the president only has his base and no one else. As for who people want to see run against President Trump, 29% of Republicans and right-leaning independents say they like Utah Senator Mitt Romney. 76% of Democrats and left-leaning independents say they have a few favorable views on Joe Biden. Power panel now. Kayleigh McEnany, spokesperson for the RNC. John Summers, a former communications director for Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. I want to start with you, Kayleigh, on why this is that they would prefer Mitt Romney over President Trump.
Look, they don't. This poll is completely bogus. And to give you an idea of how off base this poll is, go back to when they polled about Barack Obama in 2010. They asked Democratic voters, how many of you want a primary challenge to President Barack Obama? 41% said they wanted a primary challenge. Likewise, 48% said they were definitely voting against President Obama. He went on to win the next election with 51% support. This president, President Trump, has the highest own party approval rating of any president in modern history, with one exception. That is Bush during 9/11. That is what polling consistently tells us. This is an outlier, and I think it's bogus.
All right, John, it's interesting because if that's an outlier, what does it say about people still being enamored by a man who hasn't been able to win, Joe Biden?
Yeah, well, I agree with Kayleigh. I don't put a whole lot of stock into this poll. I don't put a whole lot of stock into many polls at all because they don't often, in this particular case, they actually only went to registered voters, not even likely voters. So I don't put a whole lot of stock into it, but the reality is that President Trump's numbers have been bouncing along the bottom for a long time. He has actually reached the limit of support. Yes, he does have high approval within the Republican Party, but you need more than that in order to win elections. So I do think he's facing, some strong headwinds. At the same time, I would caution Democrats and independents who are looking for a change to not take that for granted, because taking that for granted is exactly what got him in the White House to begin with.
So, Kayleigh, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, and also just throw in this. As you look at likability and popularity, Joe Biden actually doesn't rival someone like a Bernie Sanders, does he?
That's right. No, he doesn't rival someone like a Bernie Sanders. And, when you look at likability, that's, again, a number that I throw out the window, certainly in the age of President Trump. What I do look at, though, and I put a lot of stock in, is the right direction, wrong direction poll. President Trump has really changed those numbers, putting them close to somewhere in the 40s, which that's a really good number for right direction. Normally that's hovering somewhere in the 30s, as it was during the Obama presidency. People are just feeling good about the economy, about what's going on in their daily lives. That goes a very long way. And I would also just add, in terms of approval ratings, there's a great timepiece about President Trump's numbers being stronger than anyone thinks and how they've inched upwards, and new term presidents tend to kind of inch downward. This president has a lot of support. I don't think it registers in polls, just like it didn't register in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin in 2016.
All right, we're tight on time, John, but I want to come back to what Kayleigh's talking about, an economic message, something that Democrats were criticized for in 2016, being rather anemic on that issue.
Yeah, I'm not sure what bubble she's living in, to be honest with you, because people aren't feeling all that great right now, especially when you
just throw in this. As you look at likability and popularity, Joe Biden actually doesn't rival someone like a Bernie Sanders, does he?
That's right. No, he doesn't rival someone like a Bernie Sanders. And, when you look at likability, that's, again, a number that I throw out the window, certainly in the age of President Trump. What I do look at, though, and I put a lot of stock in, is the right direction, wrong direction poll. President Trump has really changed those numbers, putting them close to somewhere in the 40s, which that's a really good number for right direction. Normally that's hovering somewhere in the 30s, as it was during the Obama presidency. People are just feeling good about the economy, about what's going on in their daily lives. That goes a very long way. And I would also just add, in terms of approval ratings, there's a great timepiece about President Trump's numbers being stronger than anyone thinks and how they've inched upwards, and new term presidents tend to kind of inch downward. This president has a lot of support. I don't think it registers in polls, just like it didn't register in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin in 2016.
All right, we're tight on time, John, but I want to come back to what Kayleigh's talking about, an economic message, something that Democrats were criticized for in 2016, being rather anemic on that issue.
Yeah, I'm not sure what bubble she's living in, to be honest with you, because people aren't feeling all that great right now, especially when you have 800,000 people who are out of work in the longest government shutdown in American history that has already cost our economy billions of dollars. So I don't think people are feeling as great as we want them to. So hopefully he can turn that around.
I'm glad you guys came back from Puerto Rico.
I wasn't there, but thanks so much.
She got a shot in there. Kaylee, John, thank you very much.
I'm an uninformed one, but
great,
yeah.
Great
Thanks,
to see
guys.
you in the new year. New York City could soon join the movement to give employees a break from calling, texting, emailing while with work when they're actually off the clock. A live report on that.
We'll explain. Plus, the latest on a top North Korean official's visit to Washington, which may lead to a second summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un. And a major winter storm bearing down on several...
Because in New York City, 98% of companies are small businesses. Critics say they would suffer the most, with the cost of business going up, and it could also incentivize complaints. In theory, a worker could file a complaint to protect themselves from losing their job for another reason.
And it's these small businesses that don't have the human resource department, that don't have a bunch of lawyers at their command, who are able to deal with these complaints, who are able to comply with these laws, and who need to be able to communicate with their employees in the most efficient possible way, and often that's email or a cell phone.
At a hearing yesterday, workers for that bill said there's an unspoken pressure to always respond to the boss's emails, no matter what time it is. And really, that means doing unpaid work from home. In reality, no one's billing overtime for that.
No one's really off the clock anymore because of their cell phones. So you're pretty much working 24 hours a day. There were labor laws put in place many decades ago to make sure that you had time off of work. Technology has turned a 5-day work week to what I believe to be an 8-day work week.
The bill has 6 co-sponsors. It would take 26 of the 51 council members to pass. It's still being debated, so it could get some amendments. But the big question that's really on the table is whether it's the government's job to legislate email hours, or if the shift, this cultural shift, should actually come from somewhere else, Harris.
Well, exactly. And it also gives people the right to just do what they're going to do. And if I want to stay on my phone, I will. Does that make me more competitive than the other coworker?
Right.
Who can legislate that? Jackie, good to see you. Thank you. I'll be right back. Political battle between President Trump and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi as the partial government shutdown rages on. This is Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. The president has blocked Pelosi's use of a military aircraft for a trip to Afghanistan. It happened at the very last moment yesterday, citing the shutdown. This after the House Speaker called for the president to delay his State of the Union address over what she called security concerns. A spokesperson for Pelosi hit back today, saying this, quote, "The delegation was prepared to fly commercially to proceed with this vital trip. This morning we learned that the administration had leaked the commercial travel plans as well. In light of the grave threats caused by the president's action, the delegation has decided to postpone the trip," end quote. Peter Doocy is live on Capitol Hill, and we do more reporting on this to figure out where the facts are. Peter?
Harris, the Speaker of the House is not talking to President Trump today about border wall money in a potential spending bill, but she is making this sensational accusation that after postponing the Democratic delegation's trip yesterday, the administration leaked a commercial itinerary.
We had the prerogative to travel commercially, and we made plans to do that until the administration then leaked that we were traveling commercially, and that endangers. We weren't going to go because we had a report from Afghanistan that the president outing our trip had made the scene on the ground much more dangerous.
But a senior White House official calls that charge asinine and shared with me this morning the State Department email that Pelosi is referencing there, including the part that says operational security was severely compromised because the Afghan media started reporting that Pelosi's delegation could be arriving by a commercial flight, which would be easy to predict. The State Department did not accuse the administration of leaking anything after that initial announcement. Regardless of what happened, though, Pelosi is here, which Republicans are pleased about.
So I think it's appropriate for him to keep everybody here and others. You know, we're all on call and will be, but if she's in Afghanistan, she's not going to be on call. And we need to, and they're the ones, it's the Democrats that are keeping keeping everything closed. And so that's a perfectly good reason for him to want her here.
Some federal employees can't afford food anymore after a paycheck-free month. So today, Virginia Senator Mark Warner popped up at a food bank to feed the furloughed.
Why would you hold folks in the State Department? Why would you hold folks who work at the Smithsonian as contract workers? Why would you hold folks who work with people getting food stamps hostage when the dispute is about border security? I think the actions of this White House are disgraceful.
Another problem looming in February, Super Bowl security. Democrats are apparently worried now that the game in Atlanta might need to be postponed, and a Republican from Georgia told me this morning that one issue could be Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport.
The airport is a challenge. I've been through Atlanta twice this week, and I can tell you there are long lines, and that's something that we need to work on. But again, I have complete confidence in TSA and their professionalism. They get it. They understand what we're doing right now and what we're going through.